Our speaker tonight is Dr. Simon Elliott, FSA, a specialist on Roman history and an award-winning archaeologist, broadcaster and author. Tonight he'll be speaking about Septimius Severus' northern campaigns and giving you all a preview of his forthcoming landmark biography of this great and fascinating emperor. With that, Simon, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you for coming, everybody. As Patrick said, my name is Dr. Simon Elliott. I'm an archaeologist, a historian, and a broadcaster. You have me on a good night because I've just finished a run of filming 3 television shows back to back. And you're going to see some pictures of some of them later. One was in Pompeii, where I spent a week being able to access Pompeii at dawn before any of the public were in. And the other one was in Rome, where similarly we did the same thing with the Forum Romanum. So I'm on a good run at the moment. And we're talking tonight about Septimius Severus, who, if anybody knows me, will know it's my favourite Roman emperor. I think Septimius Severus was the most powerful of all Roman emperors, which is a big statement. But consider, Severus controlled more legions than any other Roman emperor, 33, and he also expanded the geographic area of the empire on a permanent basis to a greater extent than any other Roman emperor. And when he campaigned in Britain at the end of his life, and that's what I'm going to culminate talking about tonight, he led a force of 57,000 men, which is by far the largest campaigning force ever on British soil. So if you want a comparator, look at the Battle of Towton and the Wars of the Roses. In total, about 30,000 men engaged, while just the Roman force in AD 209 and AD 210 in the far north of Britain, Scotland, was 57,000 men. So this is a man who is defined by superlatives, an emperor who believed in monumentalizing his reign, as I will demonstrate in the talk. The book on the right is from 2016, my first book on Severus. It's based on my PhD research, which focuses specifically on Severus's campaigns in Scotland at the end of his life. But through the good guidance of Charlie Viner, my agent, who's here tonight, my next book's coming out in the spring, and it's a full-fat biography, The African Emperor, the generational defining biography, I would hope, of Septimius Severus, which is a good time because when Gladiator 2 comes out in November, it's about the Severans. So Caracalla and Geta, who are his 2 sons, they're the protagonists in the movie. So all of a sudden, thanks to Ridley Scott, I'm going to go front and centre stage with the African Emperor. So thank you very much, Ridley Scott. Next slide, please, Patrick. Severus was from North Africa, and I'm going to talk about his background in the presentation, but I love this image. It's called the Severan Tondo. It is a contemporary portrait of the Severan family, probably around AD 202-203, when they were in Egypt. So it's effectively a Fayum portrait. It's dinner plate sized. It's in the Altars Museum in Berlin. I've actually held it, and it's absolutely beautiful. The colours still pop. They absolutely pop. The thing to look at here, though, is that Severus is very dark-skinned. He's often called the African Emperor, or he's called the Black Emperor because he's dark-skinned. Julia Domna there, the daughter of the chief priest of the sun god Heliogabalus in Emesa, is alabaster white. In the Roman world, for me, this is a Mediterranean empire. That image is absolutely normal. So it wouldn't cause any comment whatsoever in the Roman world. Severus was North African and very, very, very proud of his North African heritage, as I'll discuss. Also, you can almost see the end of the presentation here in the Tondo, because you can see that Caracalla has Memorio Damnatio Geta here on the left. So Caracalla on the right, Geta on the left there. As you will find out, Caracalla murdered Geta within a year of their father dying. Next slide, please. So tonight, the presentation will cover as follows. I'll give you a little bit of background about Severus, so you know who we're talking about. I'll then talk about the sources I've used in my research and why they're very, very good compared to many periods in Roman history. I'll then give you a bit of brief background about Britain in the 2nd century AD to build up to the early 3rd century campaigns of Severus in Scotland. And then we'll move on to a proper biography of Severus, and I'll also talk about Severan Rome. So if you go to Rome today, so I'm going back on Friday to lead a tour actually, about a third of the Rome you will see today is Severan. And a lot of that you won't know unless you actually go into detail with the inscriptions, but a third of Rome today is Severan. I'll then talk about the Severan military, because Severus was the first great reforming emperor of the Roman Empire. And then finally, I'll talk about his Expeditio Felicissima Britannica, which was his campaign to conquer the far north of Britain at the end of his life. So this is an emperor who fought in every frontier successfully in his world. And he chose to fight his final campaign when he probably knew that he hadn't got many years left in Britain trying to conquer the far north, and I'll explain why later. That will include a timetable, the force he used, the fact logistics were very important. If you've got 57,000 men campaigning, you need to have very good logistics. I'll go through the strategy he used, and then I'll tell you what happened in the campaigns, and we'll finally discuss the legacy. Thank you, Patrick. So, Septimius Severus was born in Leptis Magna in Tripolitania on the 11th of April, AD 145. So, Tripolitania was the richest part of Africa Proconsularis, which is the richest province in North Africa, probably excluding Egypt. So, it's super rich. It's a super rich province. So, he's born into the super rich part of a super rich province. Remember, the Roman Empire, to emphasize, is a Mediterranean empire. So, we often see North Africa today through the prism of our own world. Maybe it's a place of difference, maybe not. For the Romans, it was a Mediterranean empire. It was a fully functioning part of the Roman Empire where many leading Romans came from and enjoyed successful lives. Severus is a good example. Severus was the emperor from 193 to 211. He campaigned in Britain from 208 to 211, and he died in York on the 4th of February, AD 211. So consider, he was born in the blistering heat of a spring in North Africa, in Leptis Magna in Tripolitania, and he died in the freezing cold of a northern British winter in 211, which is an interesting story arc, to say the least. He was the founder of the Severan dynasty, which ended with the assassination of Alexander Severus in 235, which is the event which ushered in the crisis of the 3rd century. So the failure of his dynasty, I would argue his own reign was successful, but the failure of his dynasty basically ushered in the event which almost made the Roman Empire implode. And I'll talk about that later as well. Next slide, please, Patrick. So the sources we use. So for all of my research on the Severans, Cassius Dio is the most important because he was a contemporary. So if you want to know how up close and personal Cassius Dio was, the senator, even though we only have snippets of his actual original work, you have this beautiful passage when Commodus is the emperor, and he describes being forced with the other senators to go to the Colosseum to watch Commodus fight in the arena against drugged gladiators and drugged animals, although also everybody knew, even though Commodus thought he was actually fighting real opponents. And Commodus famously liked shooting the heads off ostriches, so Cassius Dio tells us. And on one occasion, while in the arena, Commodus shot the heads off 100 ostriches with a sickle-shaped head. And then, while he was being applauded by the senators, he went to pick one of the heads up, went up to the senators, and in front of Cassius Dio, he tells us, wagged the ostrich's head up and down and said, "If you don't behave, you're next." And everybody had to laugh because Commodus was the emperor. So Cassius Dio is a superb resource for us. As with all primary sources from the ancient world, you have to be careful with them, but this is the best we've got. Herodian is also useful. The Historia Augusta is also useful. You have the Latin chroniclers who use the first three as their sources, which may be a little useful. But then you've got some very, very good modern sources as well. So Tony Burley wrote a biography of Severus in the 1970s, which is still a very, very good book. Shepherd Freer also commented on Severus in Britain. David Breeze is still the authority in the far north of Britain and on the northern frontier, as is Lawrence Kepi, Anthony Cam, and importantly Rebecca Jones, who is the leading expert in the world on Roman marching camps, and that's very important for this story. So at the end of every day's march in enemy territory, the Roman military built a marching camp. And if they survive in any form today, and you can match the size to the size of a given force from contemporary literature, you can try and do a dot to dot. to find out what the routes were of the campaigns. And we're very fortunate in Wales and particularly Scotland that we have that available to us. Next slide, please, Patrick. So this is Severus at the beginning of his campaign in 210. He's fought the campaign in 209. He's won. He's gone back to York, which he turned into his imperial capital. He's been successful. And then the natives revolt again, and they have to fight the next campaign in 210. And this is the quote that's put into the mouth of Severus by Dio. So Dio says Severus is standing on the podium in York with his whole army in front of him before they go on campaign. And he has Severus use a quote from the Iliad. So this is Severus quoting the Iliad. And the quote is, "No, we are not going to leave a single one of them alive, down to the babies in their mothers' wombs. Not even they must live. The whole people must be wiped out of existence, with none to shed a tear for them, leaving no trace." So this is the way Dio wants us to see Severus. That's very, for me, unequivocal, and it's fitting with Severus's character. This is a leading military figure in the ancient world, and to my mind, one of the leading Roman emperors on campaign. Very set on his objective and very brutal. And in actual fact, the archaeological record now shows that actually there was an attempt at a genocide in the 210 campaign, as I will demonstrate. Next slide, please, Patrick. So a bit of background, my perspective on Roman Britain in the 2nd century as we build up to Severus in the 3rd century. So I always say that Britain was the Wild West of the Roman Empire. You're a long way from Rome, and there's always a large military force in Britain, probably bigger than it would normally be because the far north is never conquered. Only one person, I think, could claim to have conquered the far north of Britain from a Roman perspective, and that's very briefly, and that's Agricola for a few months. Severus almost did, but then he died in York. So the Romans usually have, I think, about 12% of their entire military establishment in Britain in what is only 4% of the geographic area. So this is a very, very big military force in that particular area. There's also a very clear divide between the south and east and north and west. So if you're living on a line south of the Severn to the Humber, you may as well be in Gaul. You're a full fat functioning part of the Roman Empire. If you're north and west of it, even though you're within the frontier, but you're in the north and west of the province, you're in something very different. You're in a part of Britain where there's this significant military presence. So the whole regional economy is bent on maintaining the Roman military. So you have a much better experience in Roman Britain living in the south and east than the north and west, in my opinion. And then you get a build-up of military activities throughout the 2nd century in Britain, which is all well referenced in the primary sources. Usually when you have a new dynasty or a new emperor, so most Roman emperors would see Britain as a place where if they needed some martial success, they could pick a fight easily, either Britain or on the Parthian, later the Persian frontier. And then towards the end of the 2nd century, around the time Commodus becomes the emperor, you have the first mention of two major tribal groupings in the far north, the Mightiae, who are broadly in the Scottish borders and in Fife, and then the Caledonians in the upper Midland Valley and into the Highlands. So what's happened there is an amalgamation, from a Roman perspective anyway, because that's the source we're using, the Roman sources, an amalgamation of the tribes that Ptolemy described earlier into now these big confederations, probably through contact with Rome. Next slide, please, Patrick. And here you can see, so to my point, you've got the Mightiae there in Fife and down into the Scottish borders, the Caledonians above them. They're marching camps, by the way, from the Severan campaign, which I'm going to go into in much more detail later. That's just to give you a sense of what I call the battle space. So this is going to be the battle space I'm going to talk about. Next slide, please, Patrick. So, Severus, short biography. This is Leptis Magna, as Severus would have known it. So when Severus campaigned in the east at the end of the 2nd, beginning of the 3rd century, he was very successful, and therefore he did a triumphal tour through North Africa, spent a couple of years in Egypt, then went through Libya, then through Tunisia, as we call them today, then Algeria, and through Morocco. basically to show off the fact that as a North African, he'd been so successful. He'd founded a new dynasty. And everybody took him really seriously. So I've been to Algeria 3 times in the past 2 years looking at the amazing Roman sites there. Everywhere you go, there's a Severan phase that's very overt. Most cities you go to, Timgad, Jamila, Constantine, in the Roman phase, the forum is the Severan Forum, the Imperial Cult Temple is the Severan Imperial Cult Temple, the Capitoline Temple is the Severan one as well. So basically, every time anyone got word that Severus was on the way, they took it really seriously, because they knew that he liked being monumentalized, and so you get this big urban environment. No better than in Leptis Magnus. So you've got the new harbour which Severus built. It's his hometown. You've got the theatre which Severus built. You've got the governor's palace which Severus built. You've got the forum and basilica. They're all Severan. So when you walk around Leptis Magna today, if you are able to, nearly everything you're walking around is Severan. And to contextualise, so I'm talking a lot about North Africa today because Severus is North African. So there's Leptis Magna at the bottom, that's Tripolitania. There's Africa Proconsularis, which is the larger of the provinces there. And look at the close proximity to Sicily there, and then the foot of Italy there as well. And again, to emphasise from a Roman perspective, North Africa was a fully functioning part of the Roman Empire. It's no different to any other part of the Roman Empire. And parts of it was super, super rich. And it was famous in the Roman world for men of literature, for legal thinking. It was really, really a major part of the empire, which is often forgotten today. Next one, please, Patrick. So the Severan family tree. So Severus was, through his father's line, Punic. So his great-grandfather was called Septimius Mesa. So Mesa is a Carthaginian, Phoenician, Punic name, which it would be in that part of the world. And it's his grandfather, Septimius Severus, on the second line down, who changes the name to a Roman name. So suddenly we go from Septimius Mesa to Septimius Severus. The Severans have arrived. So in that generation, they chose to adapt the trappings of being elite Romans. But for clarity, his father's lineage was Carthaginian. You then go to his father, Septimius Geta, who for some reason was nowhere near as successful as Severus's grandfather, who was the big man, the really powerful man in Leptis Magna. Well, Severus's father, for some reason, probably because he was ill, didn't follow in his father's footsteps. But my word, did Septimius Severus himself overachieve. So his education began when he was in Leptis Magna. He then went to Rome and famously chose to keep his guttural, to the Romans, North African accent when speaking Latin. So he wanted to basically promote his own individuality. We see Julia Domina there, his second wife. I'll come to actually a full chronology in a second. So Julia Domina, his second wife. Their sons, Caracalla and Geta. So at the end of 211, Caracalla has Geta killed. Famously, Geta dies bleeding to death in his mother's arms. You then move on after Caracalla is assassinated in 217 to Heliogabalus and finally Alexander Severus. So that is the Severan dynasty there, and it finishes with Alexander Severus. And it really, really, really peaks under Septimius Severus. Okay, thank you. So it peaked early. So the key dates, and then we move on to lots of nice pictures to talk to. So Severus enters the Senate, or he's born in 145, enters the Senate in 170, marries his first wife, Pacia Marciana, in 175. His first big job on his cursus honorum is to become the legate, the general in charge of Legio for Scythica, which is an elite Roman legion on the Syrian frontier. So it's a legion that's facing off against the Parthians. So his first job as a senior military officer is a really, really important job. And interestingly, the governor of Syria at the time is Pertinax, who later becomes the first of the emperors in the year of the 5 emperors. And Pertinax becomes Severus's mentor, as we'll see. Pacia Marciana dies quite early, and then in 185, Severus becomes the governor of Gallia Lugdunensis. So Gallia Lugdunensis is the province which is the thin strip through the middle of Gaul. So it goes from the Channel Islands through to Lyon. And it's very wealthy. It's not a frontier province, but it's an important province. It anchors the centre of Gaul. And by the way, at the same time, Pertinax becomes the governor of Britain. So again, Severus and Pertinax are neighbours. Then you have the famous story of Severus writing to Julia Domna, the daughter of the high priest of the sun god Heliogabalus in Emesa, saying, "Can you marry me, please?" And she says yes, and then she sails all the way from Syria through to Lyon, and they get married in Lyon. Clearly they'd met when Severus was earlier based in Syria. And then Caracalla is born in 188 in Lyon, Geta's born in 189 in Milan, and then Severus becomes the consul briefly, and this is important now, in 190, before he gets a really big promotion. Next slide, please, Patrick. So the promotion is to become the governor of Pannonia Superior, which is one of the most important provinces in the Roman world. You can see there it's anchoring the defences of the upper Danube and defending it from any incursions from into the northeast of Italy. So it's a really, really, really important province. And also, it's been the centre through its capital Carnuntum, the provincial capital, of the Romans fighting the Marcomannic Wars. So the Marcomannic Wars started under Marcus Aurelius, ended under Commodus, probably lasted 20, 25 years. This is the conflict that's in the movie The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. This is the conflict that's in the movie Gladiator, the original Gladiator. So it was a really, really intense, decades-long war that the Romans fought against the Marcomanni and their Quadi and their Sarmatian allies. And during that conflict, some Germans actually managed to get through to the Adriatic. So the Romans actually experienced real territorial jeopardy for the first time in probably 2 or 3 centuries. So that conflict was very, very important for Severus, because when he arrived in Pannonia Superior, the legions he took over were the elite legions on that Danubian frontier. Next slide, please. And that's very important now, because we come forward to 193. Severus is still in Carnuntum in Pannonia Superior. There's another individual called Clodius Albinus, who's the governor in Britain. And there's another individual called Pescennius Niger, who is the governor in Syria. And all 3 of them, and Pertinax, and Maximianus, who is the individual behind Maximus in Gladiator, he was a real man, all of them were a band of brothers who fought together in the Marcomannic Wars. So they all knew each other. And suddenly, as I'm going to explain, in a moment of extreme imperial jeopardy, they're suddenly set against each other for power. So you have 192, 193, New Year's Eve, Commodus is assassinated. It's a very unlikely assassination. So you have a plot by the court chamberlain, the Praetorian prefect, and Commodus's mistress, Marcia, who all find themselves on a proscription list which says they're going to be executed in the new year. So they move a plot forward quickly, and they try and poison Commodus on New Year's Eve in 192. But Commodus has been drinking all day because it's New Year's Eve. And then he decides, before he goes to bed, to have a bath to sweat everything off. While he's sweating everything off in the bath, he's given some poisoned sweetmeats by Marcia, but it just makes him sick because he's drunk. But he knows something's wrong. But the good news for the plotters is they've got a plan B. The plan B is to have Commodus's wrestling teacher, Narcissus, ready to launch himself at Commodus, and Commodus is strangled to death by his own wrestling coach. Doesn't help Narcissus, of course, because Narcissus then, within 2 weeks, ends up being eaten by lions in the arena. However, on this occasion, the job is done. Commodus is dead. The Praetorian Guard then elect Pertinax as the emperor at the instigation of the Praetorian prefect. So Pertinax becomes the first emperor. At the time, he was the prefect of Rome. However, he doesn't last long. He lasts 3 months. At the end of the first month, the Praetorian Guard go to Pertinax and say, "Can we have some money?" And he says, "No." At the end of the second month, February, they say, "Can we have some money or we'll kill you?" And he says, "No." Then at the end of the third month, they kill him. So Pertinax is dead. He's not read the writing on the wall. So Pertinax is dead. So the 3 candidates now in Britain, Carnuntum on the Danube, and in Antioch in Syria all declare that they're going to take over the throne. They're a long way from Rome, though, even Severus on the Danube. And so in the short term, a senator called Didius Julianus bribes his way to become the next emperor. It doesn't last very long, though, because shortly afterwards, Severus arrives with 5 legions in Rome. And these are crack legions. And remember, Severus is driven by the fact that the Praetorian Guard have assassinated his own mentor. So he gets the whole 5,500 strong Praetorian Guard in the Forum Romanum, has them strip, and then says to them, I should kill you, but I'm not. I'm going to cashier you all, and I'm going to banish you all to live the rest of your life at least 100 miles away from Rome. And then he recreates the Praetorian Guard to twice the strength with his own Danubian veterans. So suddenly he's been backed by a super elite, loyal Praetorian Guard. And with that backing, he goes into the Senate with his sword drawn and says, I'm the emperor. And they say, absolutely no problem. And therefore, the Severan dynasty begins in October 193. So it's a proper lightning strike. I'm going to have to be corralled in here. That's Pertinax on the right-hand side there. That statue, by the way, is on one of the corners in the Vatican Museum that millions and millions of people walk past every year. No one knows who he is. But in actual fact, I've written a book on Pertinax, one of my 21 books, and I love Pertinax because he can truly claim to have been the son of a slave who became the emperor of Rome, because his father was a manumitter slave. So his own personal story was amazing. Pertinax didn't even join the military until his mid-30s, and he ended up being the emperor. And to the Romans, every Roman would know who Pertinax was, because he was the everyman who proved that anybody could achieve anything in the Roman Empire. Classic Roman conceit, clearly most people couldn't, but Pertinax actually did, he was the real deal. That's the bust of Pertinax, which is now in the British Museum, which was found at Lullingston Roman Villa, because Pertinax served in York as a junior officer with 6 victrix. He then commanded a unit of auxiliary infantry on Hadrian's Wall at Housesteads. He was the commander of Housesteads. And then finally, he was the governor of Britain in 185 to 190. So he had a long affiliation with Britain anyway, and that's why the bust was there at Lullingston Roman Villa. So Severus has a problem. He's in Rome, the Senate are backing him. Why wouldn't they? He's got his legions, he's got the Praetorian Guard. But he's got Albinus in Britain, who actually is probably a better general than Severus, by the way. At least that's what the Roman military thought. And he's got Niger in Antioch, who's got a huge force because he's got the whole Eastern Army. So Severus, very canny, he's a very good political operator. He buys off Albinus in the short term by making him his Caesar. So in the Roman world, many of you will know this, but in the Roman world, the big individual was Augustus, the first emperor, and then Caesar. It's flipped in our world. We think of Caesar first and then Augustus. But for the Romans, it was Augustus and then Caesar. That's why you have in the later empire, the senior emperor is the Augustus and the junior one is the Caesar. That's what's happening here. So Severus is saying to Albinus, you behave and I'll make you my junior emperor. All well and good. It works. Also, bear in mind, Albinus and Niger are a long, long way from Rome, London and Antioch, and Severus is already there. So Severus decides to concentrate on Niger, and he fights his first Eastern campaign, which is highly successful. So he defeats Niger, and then he invades 3 border states between the Roman world and Parthia, the Persians, and he conquers those as well. So it's all good, until he gets word that Albinus has had a change of mind. In 196, Albinus finds out that Severus had secretly made Caracalla and Geta his Caesars as well. So Albinus can see what's happening here. He knows he's been played. He's probably playing for time anyway, to be honest. And so he invades Gaul. He takes all 3 British legions, so 2 Augusta from Caerleon, 6 Victrix from York, 20 Valerii Victrix from Chester. He gets a legion from Spain to join him. None of the Rhine legions join him, and none of the Gallic legions join him. But he's got enough troops to seize Lyon, Lugdunum, the capital of the province of Gallia Lugdunensis, and he knows that Severus can't ignore that, because that's where Severus got married. That's where Severus's eldest son Caracalla was born. It's a big deal. So Severus comes back from the east, and he goes along the Danube collecting the legions, and then he goes along the Rhine collecting the legions, and then he drops down like a sword of Damocles onto Lugdunum, Lyon. And Albinus and Severus in 197 fight a titanic battle, which Dio tells us had 150,000 men on either side. Now, the entire Roman military establishment at the height of the Principate under Severus was probably about 330,000 men. So clearly, it wasn't 300,000 men, but probably it may have been 75,000 men aside. This is a huge battle. It lasts 2 days. Severus almost dies twice. He's knocked off his horse twice. He's saved from being killed by the Praetorian Guard at least once. But ultimately he wins. By the skin of his teeth he wins. And Albinus is brought before him, ritually beheaded, and the head gets sent to Rome to show, Sarah's saying get back in the light, get sent back to Rome to show that Albinus is dead. And then Severus ritually tramples on Albinus's beheaded body on his charger to show he's the boss. So he's won. So he then sends military inspectors to Britain to bring the recalcitrant province back into the imperial fold. And they go to London, and they're basically being given orders to show who the boss is. So the idea is to do something which will demonstrate what Severus can do, and if you misbehave again, then you know what you're going to get. And what they do is they build the land wall of Roman London, probably about 200. There's no enemy without that far south, so it's all inwardly focused as a demonstration of imperial power. It's very Severan, it's very Roman. And it's very important in our world today because the Severan land walls of London are the Roman land walls of London, which become the medieval land walls of London, which to this very day delineate the city of London. So the square mile, the financial powerhouse of the Western world, is defined by a wall built by a Roman emperor from North Africa to show his power against a usurper who he defeated. And I just really, really love that. He then fights the Second Eastern Campaign, where he's highly successful. He invades Parthia and he sacks the Parthian capital Ctesiphon, one of the few Roman emperors to do it. And that's very important when we look later at why he invaded Britain. He then parades through North Africa, so all the fine urban environment I love going to see is built at that time. Then returns to Rome, which he hated. He went to Rome 4 times in his entire time as emperor, didn't stay any longer than 4 months. So he really hated Rome. And finally campaigns in Britain 208, 211, and then dies in York. So firstly, that is a very nice section of the Severan land wall, which is the section near Tower Hill Tube Station, which many of you will have seen. There's a really beautiful new museum opened at Vine Street, just behind the back, which is an extension of that, but it's pristine, so it's really worth going to see. So the Vine Street Roman Wall Museum. Next one, Patrick. This is York, which is going to play a very important part of the story in a minute. So when Severus comes to York in 208, he turns York into his imperial capital. He doesn't just arrive, as I will demonstrate, with the military. He brings the imperial family. Caracalla campaigns with him, Geta and Julia Domna, his wife, the love of his life. They govern the empire from York itself. He brings part of the Senate, he brings the fiscus treasury, he brings the Praetorian Guard. So from 208 to 211, the Roman Empire was actually controlled in York. And by the way, before Severus came to Britain, he ensured he'd got supporters in all the key provinces and the key military units in the provinces if he didn't trust the incumbent. And it's what I call the Severan reset. So at the time he died in 211, 90% of the senior figures in the Roman world, certainly running the provinces and the military, were North African. So this is Severan York. So you've got the legionary fortress there, founded by IX Hispana. At this point, it's been lived in by 6 Victrix. The Principia and the Praetorium in the middle there, they're immediately below York Minster today, if you want to get a sense of geography. Where the bridge is going over from the fortress to the Canaba civilian settlement on the south, that's more or less where the bridge is today. And then on the left-hand side there, where you've got the built environment, that's where the railway museum is. And then the railway station itself is down there. So that is York as Severan would have known it. Just remember, though, that when he's campaigning in Scotland, he's got 57,000 men who gather around York. That's a lot of soldiers for what is a very small provincial town. Next one. And also, recently, I was honoured to be invited to visit and speak to the archaeological digging team in Carlisle, who are digging a brand new Roman site, which is on the north side of the river in Carlisle from the Roman fort on the south side. And it's Severan, and it's monumental. It's either a Grand Mancio, where the Staingate Road and Hadrian's Wall effectively meet north of Carlisle, or it may even be a bathhouse. The reason being, a lot of the tiles found are tiles which you associate with a bathhouse, so voussoir tiles and things like that, and they're all made in a North African style. So you can almost imagine Severus comes to York, and in the same way North Africa, you get this rebuilding of the urban environment. Across the north of Britain, everyone's trying to do the same to impress him. We do know that he visits Carlisle at least once. And you have these busts here which were found last year. I think that's Julia Domna, by the way. And that's the very happy archaeologist there holding a bust that was only found 2 weeks ago. Actually, that was found 2 weeks ago. It's one of 3, and that was found 2 weeks ago, the day before I held it. And you can see a mausoleum there, and then you can see, look at the depth they're digging now to get to the drains. So they're digging the drains of the bathhouse. And actually the pumps there, that's experimental archaeology. It's not there to keep the water out, they're pumping water in because the drains still work. So the drains are probably a grand bathhouse built to impress Septimius Severus still work. Next one, please. So now Severan Rome. Next one, Patrick. So this is the Arch of Septimius Severus at the head of the Forum Romanum in Rome. It's probably the only thing most people associate with Severan Rome, apart from maybe the Baths of Caracalla. I'll come to that in a minute. This arch, next slide please, Patrick, tells you everything you need to know about the thinking of Severus. So he deliberately built his monumental arch to celebrate his victory over the Parthians in 200, right next to the Senate Curia house. So that's the Senate. The Severan arch is outside the entrance to say, I am the boss, you behave. And actually part of the foundations of the Severan arch are actually on the foundations of the Senate house itself. So that's a really bold statement for the first emperor of a new dynasty. Next slide, please. This is the Temple of Vesta in the Forum Romanum. Much of the Forum Romanum burnt down towards the end of the reign of Commodus, and it was rebuilt by the Severans, and in particular the Temple of Vesta was rebuilt under the stewardship of Julia Domna. So the Temple of Vesta you see today is Severan. It's the Temple of Vesta built by Julia Domna. Next. This is the Imperial Palace looking from immediately in front of the Colosseum. So that's on top of the Palatine Hill. In fact, it's a slice through the Palatine Hill, and they're called the Severan buildings. So most of the Palatine Imperial Palace you see today is Severan. Next slide, please. This is the viewing platform on top of the Severan buildings looking towards the Circus Maximus. So that is the view the Severan family would have had watching chariot racing in the Circus Maximus. Next one. And the next one as well. And then there you go. So if you're standing there, looking down towards the Circus Maximus, shimmering in the heat in the distance, somewhere over there about 1 kilometre away, are the Baths of Caracalla, which should have been called the Baths of Septimius Severus, because he commissioned them. They were going to be his grand gift to the people of Rome, this huge monumental bathing structure. But obviously, because he died in York in 211, it was renamed after his son Caracalla after Geta was killed. But it would have been the Baths of Septimius Severus. And it's worth remembering here as well that as you approach Rome on the main trunk road from the south, the Via Appia, that's the first thing you would have seen. And it would have been huge, and it would have been monumental, and absolutely stuffed with absolutely amazing sculptures. If you go to the Archaeological Museum in Naples, the ground floor is adorned with beautiful, beautiful sculptures, some life-size, some bigger than life-size. They're all from the Baths of Caracalla. So this was an incredible statement of power, which Severus wanted to be his gift to the people of Rome. Next one. There's more. So if you go on top of the Palatine Hill, one of the biggest structures, you can see the actual scale there. There's a Colosseum. So I'm talking about, sorry, I'm stepping out the light. That's the Temple of Heliogabalus. So that's the second last of the Severan emperors, but that's the largest temple actually on the Palatine or Forum Romanum. So that's Severan as well. And there's more. Next one. The Colosseum. There's a very happy archaeologist. This is the Colosseum. So the top tier of the Colosseum is Severan. Again, there was an event during the reign of Trajan where the top tier had a burning event, some kind of fire, and it wasn't fully repaired actually until the time of the Severans. And then it's the Severans themselves who have inscriptions around that top tier saying that this is Severan. So even part of the Colosseum is Severan. Next. But this is something, if you've not seen it yet, I really recommend you go and see. This is a new museum on the Chelian Hill. So 10-minute walk from the Colosseum. In fact, the first time I was there was with you, yeah. So I've been about 4 times since. So if you look on the left, this is a map of Severan Rome, contemporary, in marble, which was set in a temple in the Forum of Nerva. And today in the museum, you can still see parts of it which have been laid out beneath a glass floor, which you can walk over and try and trace your way around Severan Rome. And it's pretty accurate, actually. It's absolutely astonishing. So all of that is Severan. So I would say overall about a third of modern Rome is Severan. So the Severan military. So Severus is the emperor at the end of the 2nd, beginning of the 3rd century. It's a time when the Roman military is at the height of its power. He creates 3 new legions, 1, 2, and 3 Parthica, to fight in his second Parthian war. So he's now got 33 legions. But he starts reforming the military. He's very canny. He realizes that his troops are not just fighting as mostly they did, except against the Parthians, other heavy infantry armies. So he starts reforming them to make the troops more utilitarian. Next picture, please. So this is the classic sort of principate legionary. You can see here, this is on Trajan's column, lorica segmentata, scutum shield, etc. Next one, please. And similarly, this is a panel on the Arch of Constantine, confusingly reused from a knocked down monument to Marcus Aurelius. So it's actually Antonine. And again, you can see here mid 2nd century into the 160s, 170s. Again, absolutely classic sort of principate legionary, lorica segmentata, imperial Gallic helmet, scutum shields. Next one. This is a figure I painted. So one of the first things you start seeing on sculptures from the Severan period is the pilum, heavy lead-weighted throwing javelin, begins to disappear. And it starts to be replaced by a hasta spear, which is an earlier weapon for the Romans, but it's more utilitarian, it's more useful when you're fighting a mounted opponent. Next one. And then you can see here, this is a Severan legionary on the Arch of Septimius Severus. You can see here the scutum's gone. So no longer is this particular legionary carrying the heavy scutum, which is a full body shield. It's got a much more flexible round or oval shield, which is exactly the kind of panoply you find on later Roman legionaries. Next one. This is a panel from the Arch of Septimius Severus, and if you look closely when you're there, you can see the legionaries are depicted effectively being in what is almost a heavy infantry phalanx with spears and these oval body shields, and they're fighting. You can see bottom right there, that's the Parthian king that they're fighting. So they're forming these dense formations with spears, almost like a hoplite phalanx, to fight off Parthian heavy cavalry. And then the full circle here, this is actually contemporary with Constantine on the Arch of Constantine. These are late Roman legionaries with the round shields now, different kinds of helmets. So the evolution's taken place, begun by Severus. So here it is. You have the Marian and Caesarian legionaries moving into the Trajanic legionary, then the Severan legionary in the middle with the spear, and then you get the emergence of the oval shields into the two on the right, which are the later Roman legionaries. That evolution to make the legionaries more flexible, probably to fight mounted opponents, began with Severus. And one last thing, Patrick, note the quote, Severus's deathbed quote to Caracalla and Geta, which clearly they didn't listen to: be harmonious, enrich the soldiers, and scorn everybody else. That's all you need to know about Severus. So a brief wordy slide. This is the timetable of Severus coming to Britain. So this is at the end of his reign. So he begins thinking of coming here in 207, and in 211 he's dead. So in 207, at the beginning, he gets a letter from the governor in Britain who's called Senecio. And Senecio says, remember, there's been a repeating pattern in Britain over the past century of trouble in the north. So the letter from Senecio says, the entire island is in danger of being overrun. It's very, very, very specific. It's not the north. It's not the frontier. It's the entire island is in danger of being overrun. I need you to intervene, or I need reinforcements. And Severus, being Severus, does both. He arrives himself with the imperial family and reinforcements. So later in 207, orders get sent across the west to the military. Get ready, you're going to Britain. And probably what I think is happening is vexillation, so regiments, battalions from the legions, not the whole legions, but parts of the legions on the Rhine and Danube frontiers get stripped out, ready to come to Britain, and the auxiliaries as well. 208, Severus and the army arrive in York, which becomes the imperial capital, as I mentioned. The first campaign in Scotland is in 209. I'll go into detail in a minute. The second campaign is in 2010, when we have our genocide. And then in 211, Severus dies in York. Caracalla and Geta can't wait to get back to Rome. They hate being in Britain. They come back separately because they also hate each other, as we'll see in the movie Gladiator 2. And finally, Geta is murdered on the orders of Caracalla at the end of 211. Next slide, please, Patrick. So why did Severus choose at the end of his life? I mean, when he died in 211, he was 65, and he wasn't very well, as we'll see. So why did he come to Britain? Well, he was born in Rome. He hated being in Rome. Hated being in Rome. He's a man of action. Really hated dealing with the Senate. Caracalla and Geta, all the primary sources say, were misbehaving in the flesh pots of Rome. So he wanted to get them out of trouble. But then we have something very interesting, which lets us look at the psyche of Roman leaders and Roman rulers. It's a quote from Horace at the end of the 1st century BC, beginning of the 1st century AD. And in the poem, Horace speaks of Augustus, who he usually eulogizes. So this is quite unusual. And he says in the poem, Augustus will only be a god if he defeats the Parthians and the Britons. Augustus did neither. But that quote and that psyche would have been at the back of the mind of every subsequent Roman emperor. The greatest Roman emperor is Augustus. If I can do those two things, which no other Roman emperor has done, I will be the greatest Roman emperor. And this is Severus. Okay, this is the way the guy thinks, I think. So he's already defeated the Parthians. He's done half the job. So I think he decides to finish it and become the greatest Roman emperor by invading Britain. Which means there's a fair chance, by the way, that the letter from Senecio saying, please come to Britain because we're in danger of being overrun, was a setup to give Severus an opportunity to intervene. We'll never know. It's also his last chance at military glory because he was ill and he knew he was ill. One story says that he actually brought his funerary urn with him to Britain. We know that he was suffering from real problems with his feet, which modern interpretations call gout, but I think it's a wider pulmonary issue he's got actually. And he actually couldn't walk by the time of the 210 campaign, and that was actually led by Caracalla because Severus literally couldn't walk. Finally, the northern border is undermanned. It's still undermanned because a decade earlier you'd had the rebellion by Clodius Albinus, which culminated in the Battle of Lugdunum, 197, and Severus was reticent to rebuild the British military units quickly back up to their original strength until he knew he could trust them. So I think the northern border was undermanned. You've got Senesio's letter we've discussed. And finally, from the Mightian Caledonian perspective, often people forget the perspective of the natives of the far north. What's in it for them? Why would they want to pick a fight with Rome? Well, firstly, it's quite early in these two huge confederations coming into being, almost certainly because of the Romans gifting wealth to rulers of the various tribes in the far north. They wanted to do well, and they did do well, but they did too well. This is a warrior culture, and the leaders needed plunder for their leading warriors and their nobles. So there was a need for military success. But also, all the primary sources say in this campaign the weather was terrible. Now remember the Romans, but for us we say our weather's changeable, which is kind. The Romans didn't muck about with words. They said it was wet and cold in Britain, and the emphasis here is it was really, really, really bad. It was a terrible campaigning environment. So you may have found actually that the natives in the far north had also had a harvest shock. So the harvest had failed maybe over a year or two. So they needed plunder from the south for that as well. Next slide, please, Patrick. So what was in the Severan force? Well, I call it in my various books, this is Severus's shock and awe, writ large. You're talking about 57,000 men, the largest campaigning force ever fought in Britain. And they arrived through every port on the east coast. What does the force comprise? The whole Praetorian Guard, 10,000 men by this point. The Imperial Guard Cavalry, Severus's own pet legion, Legio II Parthica, the 3 British legions, probably 15,000 British auxiliaries to match the legions, then vexellations from the Rhine and Danube, and also don't forget the British regional fleet, the Classics Britannica. Next slide. People always forget the Classics Britannica, but I love it because it was the subject of my first book, Sea Eagles of Empire. Highly recommended, on sale in Waterstones and Blackwells across the way. This is a favourite image I use in my books. It's called the Dawn Patrol. So you've got 3 Liburnae there, which are the bireme galleys, which by this point the Roman regional fleets were using. They're only using small, nippy bireme galleys, not larger polyremes that you see in Ben-Hur or Antony and Cleopatra, simply because there's no symmetrical threat at sea. So these are specifically designed to help forces on land campaign along the coast and down rivers. Next slide. And this is one of my favourite ever pieces of archaeology. So this comes from Brancaster, which is one of the early Saxon shore forts on the North Norfolk coast. Dates to around 220 AD. The last time the Classics Britannica is mentioned in literature is about 250. So when this was created, the Classics Britannica existed. And it's a galley, it's a war galley. You can see the planking, you can see the ram, you can see the foresail, you can see the mainmast, you can see the shield down the side. I love that. That was drawn on the back of a piece of waste lead by somebody who had seen in real life a ship of the Classics Britannica. I love that. Next one. So all the ports on the east coast were used to bring this 57,000 men into Britain. They were all really, really expanded to be able to support this huge force. So this is an image of the fortified harbour at Caerleon, the legionary fortress. You can see there's the legionary fortress. You can see the amphitheatre there, the best amphitheatre in Roman Britain, I think. Well, that is how big the fortified harbour was. So you can imagine every major port on the east coast had the same kind of structures built to maintain this force in the field. Next slide. So we'll start with South Shields, so Roman Arbea. South Shields was a normal Roman fort until the Severan period, when to support the campaigns in the far north, the number of granaries was increased by a factor of 10. So when you go there today, you're not looking at barracks, you're looking at Severan granaries. So that is where most of the grain came in initially. Then the idea is, with the grain and any military supplies, you then use the river systems and the coast to bump things up the east coast. So the next big station is at Cramond on the Forth. Next picture, where you can still see the Severan granaries. So you start on the Tyne, you bump up to the Forth, and then as the campaign progresses, you bump up to Carpow on the Tay. So exactly the same, a big fortified harbour's built. That's the Principia as a crop mark. And that's the view looking back towards the Forth from the Tay, the field in front of you, which I'm going to be excavating next spring, is the Principia and Praetorium. So the headquarters and the commander's house of the Severan fortified harbour on the Tay. Next one. So here we have the battle space back. Okay, so I'll now talk about the strategy. It involves marching camps. So back one, please, Patrick, if you don't mind. Thank you. Back one. That's all right. So this one. So they're all marching camps. They're all Severan marching camps. So you can see there's a line of them below the Forth. There's a line of them along the Highland line going up to Care House, which is where Stonehaven is. So Agricola did campaign along the southern coast of the Moray Firth. Well, Severus didn't. Severus didn't go into the Highlands. He decided all he wanted to do was incorporate what we would today call the lowlands of Scotland into the province in the south. So they're all the Severan marching camps. Now, Patrick. So the marching camps, if you imagine you're a Roman legionary, I think a Roman legionary is like a middleweight Olympic weightlifter, all square and all muscle. So you're marching 6 hours a day. You finish your marching at 5 o'clock. You spend 3 hours building a marching camp, which is a full fat fort with a big ditch, with a big bank, with a palisade on top, with gateways and everything inside laid out like a Roman fort. And only then can you make your bread. So and then the next day you're doing the same again, and the same again, and the same again. And the idea is that you're never under threat when you are in enemy territory. So that is a great Peter Connolly image of Roman legionaries in enemy territory building a marching camp at the end of the day's march. Next. And this is basically the layout of what the marching camp will be. So your ditch, your bank made by the earth from the ditch, then the palisade across the top. Every legionary carried 2 stakes, which is what creates the palisade. Then you get various types of defended gateway, various kinds of towers. There's a Praetorium and a Principia in tent form in the middle. Some of these camps actually became permanent, but they began like this as marching camps. Next one. There we go. Right, so this is a recreated Roman marching camp in Britain, which I filmed it over the weekend. You can tell I filmed it over the weekend because that's me, dressed as the legate filming a TV show. There is your ditch, there is your palisade, there are your defences, the caltrops on the outside, there's your tower, etc. That's near Wrexham. It's really well worth going to see. It's called Park in the Past, a full-size recreated Roman marching camp. Next one. So this is the strategy. Severus gathers in York, leads his entire 57,000 men north in 209. They go up Deer Street. They cross the frontier in Hadrian's Wall, which Severus repairs. Remember, until the mid-19th century, Hadrian's Wall was called the Severan Wall because the first inscriptions which were interpreted were Severan, not Hadrianic. Crosses Hadrian's Wall, keeps the whole 57,000 men together as they go through eviscerating enemy opposition through the Scottish borders. And in so doing, they build a sequence of 4 70-hectare marching camps, which are the largest marching camps in the Roman world, anywhere. They get to the Forth. Severus builds a bridge of boats. He divides his force into 2. He gives Caracalla, younger, fitter, 2/3 of them, probably the British legions who were used to campaigning in the battle space. They then work their way up the Highland line till they get to Care House, Stonehaven, and As they go past any of the glens, the valleys giving access to the lowlands, they build a marching camp which later becomes a fort. So they seal it off. At the same time, the Classis Britannica seals off the coast and is supplying the legionaries and auxiliaries using the coast and river. So the Britons have got nowhere to go. If they're not fled by this point, they're trapped. The mighty and quite a lot of the Caledonians, they're trapped. They're not able to coalesce into a fighting force as the Caledonians had against Agricola with Mons Graupius because of the level of predation against them from the Romans. This is a very, very, very asymmetric conflict. It is brutal, by the way. The Romans suffer heavily because they're fighting against a guerrilla campaign. But at that point, when the Highland line sealed off and the coast is sealed off, Severus himself takes the final third of the troops from south of the Forth. This includes the Praetorian Guard, the Imperial Guard Cavalry, Legio II Parthica, an elite legion, and they slam straight through Fife, hit the Tay, then cross the Tay into the Upper Midland Valley. So this area here. And there they eviscerate everything they can see. And they're successful. It's a very, very, very brutal campaign. There you can see this is Deer Street. So this is a section of Deer Street going past Tremontium, which was the Roman fort at Newstead near Melrose. Fantastic to go and see. Do go and see the Tremontium Trust Museum. It's beautiful. And this is the Tremontium stone, marking the place where there is the Flavian and Antonite fort at Tremontium here in the field in front of you, which is only a ploughed field and very boring, except that, look on the far hillside. The far hillside, the entire hillside, as far as the eye can see, all the green there, that's the Severan marching camp. So the Severan marching camp is 8 times bigger than the well-known Flavian and Antonine fort. Next. This is a classic Roman bridge of boats, absolutely normal practice for the Romans on military campaign. This is, of course, on Trajan's column. Next. If you want to get a sense of the level of jeopardy the Romans faced in this campaign, this is Arduc. Now, Arduc is the southwestern end of the forts that Caracalla built. It's actually the site of earlier forts, but the Severan fort there is the southwestern anchor point of Caracalla's campaign going to the southeast to Stonehaven. And most Roman forts have got 1 or 2 ditches, certainly marching camps. Well, that one's got 5. So that gives you a sense of the level of jeopardy the Romans were facing in this campaign. 5 defensive ditches. That is a lot of hard work. Next. And this, if you want to get a sense of the grimness, the grimness of the campaign for the Romans in the far north, this Conradian heart of darkness, as a modern interpretation might say, in terrible weather, as the primary sources tell us. Well, this is from the Gasque Ridge, which is a series of Roman signal towers, which can see the Highland line to the front and the Forth behind. So it's where the Romans basically sent signals to the Forth saying, can we have reinforcements if there's a problem going on the Highlands. And you can see there, when you get the dips, that's the Highland line itself there. So when you get the dips, they're the glens. And beneath each one of those is a fort built by Caracalla. So almost to the end of the slides, and then I'll take any questions you have. So the campaigns, 8209, a brutal, savage onslaught. There is no meeting engagement. It's only guerrilla warfare. We know the natives, according to the primary sources, used some kind of supplement to keep them in the field longer, which was an appetite suppressant. And a new theory says it is the heath pea. There were huge casualties on both sides. So Dio, clearly exaggerating, says the Romans suffered 50,000 casualties. Well, the entire force was 57,000, so they didn't suffer 50,000 casualties, but the emphasis is on the fact that it's a difficult campaign. But weight of numbers tell in the end, the native super peace, it's all agreeable to the Romans. We have a story from Dio that Caracalla then, as Severus is about to sign the peace treaty with the Caledonians of Mighty Eye, draws his sword behind Severus's back as though it's going to be an assassination, but the Praetorian prefect intervenes. Coins and medallions are minted to victory. Severus and Caracalla take the cognomen Britannicus. All's well and good. Severus has won. Severus has done what no other Roman emperor's done. He's conquered the Britons and he's conquered the Parthians. Except that he hasn't, because over the winter, I think the penny drops with the Mytae and Caledonians that the Romans aren't going back. They're going to stick around. So they rebel. And in 210, the entire campaign is repeated with Severus's genocidal order under Caracalla, and it is successful again. Next. But the legacy is this. Severus dies in York in 211, in February the 4th. Caracalla and Geta can't wait to get back to Rome. They hate being in Britain. The military force disperses. The frontier drops down to the Solway-Firth-Tyne line exactly as it did when Agricola was recalled by Domitian. Did Severus intend to stay? Yes, I think Severus's intention was to incorporate the lowlands of Scotland into the province, which is a big deal, actually. It's a sliding door moment in British history, because if he had succeeded, then shortly afterwards you'd have had Mediterranean-style stone-built urban infrastructure in the lowlands of Scotland. You'd had permanent Roman roads, etc., and the story of the far north of Britain would have been very different. But he died, so it wasn't. Was the effort worth it? Well, he failed to conquer the far north because he died, but he did secure peace on the northern border through the genocidal order for 80 years, because the next time that we really get Britain on the map, especially in the north, is after the crisis of the 3rd century with the usurpation of Carausius in AD 286. So you do have silence in the primary sources in the far north of Britain. And it's replicated in the archaeological record now as well. So we do know in that century, the middle of the 3rd century, lots of settlements disappear and you start having forestry regrowing on former agricultural lands. So there was a huge depopulation event. Next one. So there we go. This is where the story of Severus ends in York, talking to Caracalla and Geta, saying, be nice to each other in the military, but they weren't nice to each other. And it was a terrible end for his family. Next one. You can see an example of it here. This is from the arch of Septimius Severus. So on one of the columns there, you have Caracalla on the right, you have a Parthian captive on the left, you have Geta behind the Parthian captive, Memorio Damnatio'd, but because Geta never existed, neither did his own Parthian captive, which is why the second Parthian captive's already been defaced. So a terrible end to the Severan family. All about to be brought back to life in Gladiator 2. So suddenly the Severans are going to be front and centre in popular culture for a year. I hope a year, Charlie. I hope a year. Give me 6 months, Charlie. Next one. So Severus marches on, and a couple more slides at the end here for you. So I talk about Severan Rome in a new show I've filmed with Dan Snow on Channel 5, which is going to be out in November, just before Gladiator 2 comes out, funnily enough, which is focusing on some of the key parts of Rome, including the Colosseum. And the next one, and then you can see me in another show, which is also on Channel 5 in January, a 4-part series where I am allowed to run riots as an archaeologist in Pompeii. So that's me actually on the stage of the Basilica in Pompeii being filmed with a crowd growing, wondering why is that bloke on the stage in the Basilica in Pompeii. We did have permission, by the way. Last slide. There's all my contacts. I'm prominent, posting all my research, including pictures which I allow anyone to use for free from all my travels in the Roman world on X, on Instagram, on Facebook, etc. Just feel free to use any of my research. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions.
Simon, thank you. This monumentalism, can you just explain how it was paid for?
Well, it's a great question, actually. Severus. One of the things, so part of my research between the two books has proved to me that the Severans were absolutely avaricious. They were completely on the take all the time. And Severus, through 193 to 197, when he was defeating Didius Julianus, and then he was defeating Clodius Albinus, and then he was defeating, and before that, Pescennius Niger, he basically had executed about 150 senators, right? So anybody who he didn't like, who he thought was against him, any grudge, they got slaughtered. Some of them ended up in the arena, right? And most of it was without trial. And if you do your deep research, you suddenly realise that the money's not going into the imperial fiscus treasury at all. He's pocketing it. So Severus is the Severans are the first dynasty, I think, where you start drawing a big distinction from the wealth of the imperial family itself and the imperial treasury. So I can tell you who wasn't paying for anything, the Severans. They were pocketing everything. I think Severus was encouraging other people, the leading members of society, to reach into their own pockets. And I think because he had such a reputation, especially in North Africa, but even there in Carlisle, I mean, that's a huge, if you get a chance, do go and see that in Carlisle. It's very easy to get to, and it's an enormous scale. No one's going to argue with him, are they? Because this is a guy that's walked into the Senate, backed by 5 legions, created 10,000 Praetorian veterans, drawn his sword and said, I'm the emperor. No one's going to argue with that. So it's not the Severans, I think it's the elites. It's a great question.
Yes, thank you, Simon. I just wanted to maybe explore more about his motivations and what drove him. He clearly is a military-focused man, obviously, so I was just wondering if maybe he had some reforms focused on internal issues as well. Was he a reformer in that aspect in terms of economics or maybe governance of Rome at the time, and whether he was completely different to his contemporaries? In his view, that expansion or securing the borders is the most important issue of his time.
Very, very good question. I think, so go back to my point earlier about the Severan reset. So certainly in terms of administration, I think in terms of economics, he didn't have much room for manoeuvre. And when he died, the fiscus treasury was still functioning, which when Commodus died, it wasn't. So in that sense, he must have been a successful ruler. But I don't think a Roman emperor had much leeway there. But in terms of administration, absolutely. He certainly did a reset of the imperial administration along North African lines. So at every opportunity, he promoted people from North Africa, loyalists, or people who came from his part of the world. Remember, this is a guy who had as high level education as possible in Rome, right? His father was super rich. His grandfather was super, super rich, and he's from a super rich part of the Roman world. And yet he insisted, we are told by 2 primary sources, that he insisted on keeping his guttural North African accent when speaking Latin. So he's proud of where he came from. That's where he felt most comfortable. And therefore he promoted North Africans across the board. And I think actually there's a hard edge to the way Severus administered the empire, probably in a way more so than any until you go back to the Julio-Claudians. In some ways, you could say it was almost like a hard takeover of the Roman Empire, because it did transform it into this North African thing, which lasted until 235. So that actually is quite a long time for a dynasty, really, when you think about it. Great question.
You mentioned that the south of the island of Britain was pretty passive, but you have the London Wall, which looks huge. So is this monumentalism, or was there a strategic reason for doing it? I mean, why the London Wall if everything was at peace?
Great question. It clearly wasn't for a militaristic reason, because there was no threat. So we know for a fact it was Severan, because the earliest coins found are Severan. There's nothing earlier there. And it's acknowledged across academia as coming from being built in the late 2nd, early 3rd century. So it's Severan. There is no military threat that far south. There should be no military threat any further south than the frontier on Hadrian's Wall. But if you get a big native incursion, you're looking at maybe as far south as York, so it's a long way from London. So there's no military threat. So for me, it's pure monumentalisation. But it's basically been a bully, which is very Severan. It's saying to the people of London, do you muck me about again, I can do this. Think what I can really do to you, right? And remember, it's not a defensive structure because there's no river wall. So all you've got to do is go along the River Thames and you're in. So the river wall's not built to complete the circuit until the time of Carausius in the usurpation from 286 to 296. So that's when it becomes a defensive structure. That's when the bastions are built onto it. Before that, there's not. There's just a basic, beautiful, but basic wall built on top of the Pomerium religious boundary of London. You don't do that for no reason. It's not a military reason, so it's got to be a civilian reason, sending a message. Severan monumentalization.
And on that note, we'll have to wrap up. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Simon. See you next time.
Thank you very much.